Dr Emma Hilton is a developmental biologist at the University of Manchester in the Faculty of Medical and Human Sciences. She's had a research career in clinical and developmental genetics. She's authored over 20 peer-reviewed manuscripts. She's won international prizes for her work and contributed to key medical textbooks. Over the last 5 years, she's applied her developmental biology expertise to the study of sex development, sex differences, and sport. She's published a key review of musculoskeletal physiology in transgender women suppressing testosterone, consulted with international and national sports governing bodies, and developed sports policy. She's the director of Sex Matters, which is a campaigning group for clarity about sex in law. You can follow her on Twitter at Fond of Beatles, and on Facebook, she is Emma Hilton. Emma, you've gained fame from your clear explanations of the differences in biology of males and females. Can you tell us a bit about your early successes that led to your winning Young Investigator Award for Outstanding Science from the European Society for Human Genetics?
Yes, I can. Yes. Let me try and think about how to work that for a lay audience. So I'm a developmental biologist. And so that means I study how humans grow. And we do that, developmental biologists do that using animal models. And so I work on an animal model that is a frog. And lots of people kind of think,
thank you so much. That's really helpful.
That sounds really strange, like frogs, but frogs and humans, we've got, you know, conserved evolution, conserved genetics. So I can look at what goes on in a frog and understand what goes on in a human. And I was working on a genetic disorder that causes in humans eye defects. And so I was looking at this in my frog model. I was trying to work out how does an eye grow. And I noticed that when I knocked out the gene that causes the genetic disorder, that the frogs had something going on with their internal organs. So a lot of your internal organs have some kind of left-right asymmetry, like your heart. And I noticed that the frogs had a reversal of a lot of their internal organs. And I was thinking, I wonder if humans with this genetic disorder also have something going on with their internal organs. So we looked at our patient cohort, and we found that some of them had some quite interesting and potentially quite clinically relevant reversals in their internal organs. As far as I know, that was the first time anyone had used a frog to understand something, you know, about the care of human patients in a genetic disorder field. So that's why I got that prize, because it was a breakthrough in terms of, you know, developmental biology as a whole.
Oh, that's really interesting. And has that led to any therapy or any medical support for those?
It's helped with, you know, their diagnostic kind of process and understanding the prognosis. You know, if you can have organs that are reversed, and sometimes it matters, sometimes it doesn't. And if you have a heart that's fully reversed, it's maybe not so bad, right? But if you have a stomach that's kind of twisted, and, you know, that can cause a lot of problems. So essentially we prompted the clinical groups to say, when you diagnose this genetic disorder, and it's really, really rare, it's quite interesting in terms of sex development, but when you diagnose this, don't just look at their eyes, don't just look at the things you can see outside, you need to scan them, right? You need to find out what's going on inside as well, because there might be something really important there.
Right. And tell me, is this sex related? Is it more common in girls or boys, or vice versa?
So it's a genetic disorder that affects both males and females, but it's lethal in males. So if you're a male with this genetic disorder, you don't make it out of the womb. Okay, males with
this don't have another copy of the gene.
Right. So the problematic gene is carried on the X chromosome. So if you have the problematic gene, you don't have any compensation from a healthy X. Whereas females with two X chromosomes, they can carry one bad copy because they've got a good one that just about, you know, makes them kind of healthy. They have a limited kind of set of
they're still viable.
Absolutely still viable and fertile and so on. But males can't manage without this. So I spent a lot of time looking at how this disorder was inherited and understanding, you know, talking or providing information to clinicians about women who carried the bad gene, who were wanting to be pregnant, who were concerned about, the prospects of, miscarriage and that kind of thing. So I spent a lot of time looking at sex chromosomes and, trying to work out, well, we've got a patient, has it come from mum, confirming basically it's it's male lethal.
Yeah. Well, that's just one instance, isn't it, of something where sex is crucial in determining how things work.
No, absolutely. And we probably all remember from biology lessons at school, you learn that color blindness affects, males more frequently than females. And it's the same setup, this mismatch of X and Y that makes a male versus X and X that makes a female who can compensate for something going a little bit awry, is very common, actually. And it's the reason that male babies suffer things like higher incidences of developmental delays and stuff. We know there are a lot of genes on the X chromosome that drive brain development. And if something's going wrong and you simply can't counteract that with, a healthy gene on the other X, then you're at higher risk of genetic disease.
Yeah. Well, I think I understand that. I don't have a biology background, but this is what we've seen you on Twitter explaining in terms that most of us can understand, things that are really important. And then in July 2019, we saw you live at the Women's Place Fair Play for Women conference in Westminster, which was fantastic. Your presentation was brilliant, erudite and funny. And it can still be seen on the Women's Place website and lots of other locations. Now, I think we've got links to that, which will probably go into the chat at some point. But we will get the links out later if not. How did it feel to be part of that fantastic conference?
It was amazing. It was my first public speaking event where I was talking about this. Now, scientists tend to be pretty dry. I'd only been part of speaking events where I was talking about these kind of very, weird genetic disorders and these complicated gene names. And really scientists don't tend to, as a matter of course, deal with anything that's kind of politically interesting. But I've been looking for a couple of years about this. I'm a developmental biologist and I play a few sports. I watch practically every sport apart from skiing. And I just had started to pick up, there's something going on. It was just happening outside of my academic world. I was just, watching sport and hearing a few stories and I'm thinking, yeah. So I started collecting data around 2017, 2018, trying to ask questions from a developmental biology point of view, rather than what I perceived a little bit as the sports scientists who were too busy crunching numbers, how fast is someone running? And if they weren't running that fast, it didn't really matter that, this was a trans woman. And so I started to think, well, I'm a developmental biologist and I've got something really quite unique to offer here, or at least, I can be, I can talk in a way that maybe other people haven't framed the issue, which is, don't just look at what performance is, because that's not what's really important for categories, right? It's not important for age categories or weight categories or sex categories. It's not how fast you run, it's what advantage you hold. And a developmental biologist is able to construct those kinds of category arguments, I think, perhaps better than someone with a calculator at the other end.
Yeah, I see.
I don't mean to disrespect sports scientists at all.
No, they've got their own view and they don't see the whole picture. And sure. Presumably you'd argue that you don't see the whole picture, but what you have to offer is extremely important from our point of view. Because, of course, women who miss out on places because they're beaten to it by CC Telfer, for instance, they miss out on scholarships and other stuff like that. Excellent. Just before the last general election, you wrote a letter to the Times, which was great. Professor Alice Roberts was unable to counter your arguments, but instead she resorted to an ad feminem comment about your employment status. I think your position was a bit awkward at that time, but is it a bit more secure now?
Yes, it is. I had been on track as a research fellow, and we missed a funding opportunity. It was good reviews, but we actually found some data that we weren't completely confident, completely secure was true. So we pulled that funding because we didn't want it to go through on a kind of false set of data.
Right.
And then we started to, Brexit happened and then COVID happened. So so I was a research fellow and then I was out of contract. So developmental biology is a broad church. I'd worked on eyes, I'd worked on neuromuscular development, and there was a group kind of sideways from me who were working on skin development, and they said, look, we've got some money, come and work with us while you secure more funding. And so that's where I am now. I'm back to kind of after a blip, but it's not a blip, and it's part of what Alice Roberts, the attack on me for being a mere research technician is really a kind of attack on how I think science works, because it is, I believe, one of the most cooperative efforts. And I'd never worked within a hierarchy in that sense. I mean, aside from, career progression and that kind of thing. If someone's got something to teach you, you learn from them. It doesn't matter whether they're a professor or I've learned from students. They tell me stuff and I think, should I know that? And then, but you're just grateful that there's this kind of knowledge share that doesn't really pay attention to hierarchies. So it's really shocking that she would say, you're just a lab technician, which was my job title at the time. Therefore, you don't have anything decent to say about science. I just found that really anti-collegiate, really not how I'd worked within a scientific, environment.
Yeah. And for somebody who's supposed to be publicising and promoting science, I thought that was a really bad move, to be honest, and left a sour taste. But anyway, we're moving on. But the letter was great, and I think we've probably got a link to it that's a shareable link, and we'll look at that later. You've specialised in recent years in developmental biology, as you said, and you published with Tommy Lundeberg the key paper on the differences in male and female anatomy in Sports Medicine, a great magazine last year. Do you want to tell us a bit about that and the impact that it made and how you came to it? Because I know I'm really interested. I think everybody else is too.
Yeah, so I met Tommy first at the World Rugby Transgender Working Group conference, a couple of days we had in London, where I was invited, presumably off the back of how I've been, talking at the Women's Place UK Fair Play for Women event and, my social media activity. I was invited by World Rugby to talk about the male-female differences, but not just, look, males are 10% faster, but why are males 10% faster? And so I kind of kicked off that conference by saying, look, males are 10% faster. This is why. Now you need to go away and decide whether that can be undone. Can you unboil that male egg? Male egg is a bit of a strange construction, but you know what I mean.
Got that.
So I presented that, and I'd already been accumulating data on actually, can you unboil that male egg? What happens when males suppress testosterone? What happens to their muscles? What happens to their skeleton? What happens to their cardiovascular system? It wasn't my role to present that. And then Tommy came after me, and he's a sports scientist who is studying transgender women and transgender men as it happens. And he is looking at what happens to their muscle mass and strength. So obviously he brought in all these other studies that I'd already been analysing. So we sat down at dinner that night and said, look, we've got this overlapping data set. We've got these two angles, this kind of quite inventive partnership. Let's write this, because this is a data set that has never been used in the way that we are using it. So these are clinical studies of what happens to transgender women who have certain, obviously, health requirements. We need to know about bone density and that kind of thing. That's an important marker for health. But also in terms of mass and strength, because that's a kind of aesthetic desire for transgender women to feminize. And so we had all this data that was just clinical data tracking transgender women. We said, what does that mean for sports? Tommy is an ex-footballer and a sports scientist, and I had all this kind of bottom-up knowledge, if you like. So that's where that collaboration came from. And yes, it's been astonishingly successful, more so than my standard academic work on very quirky genetic disorders. It's been incredibly popular, and I think from there that was when I started to get a lot of attention, both good and bad.
But loads of citations in other people's research, which is what counts in academia, isn't it?
For sure. I think most papers get about 10 citations in their lifetime, and we've had 41 so far in a year. But because it's addressing a kind of what is a political hot potato, you have a metric for essentially a popularity score. How many people are talking about it? How many news agencies are talking about it? And there's this website that tracks every academic paper that's ever been published. And there's 21.5 million papers on there. And we're number 829 as of today. So we're in the top 1,000 papers that have ever been published that are being talked about the most, which is just, this is insane.
Well, it's great. And I would have thought that Manchester University would be really glad that you're getting them all this attention.
Well, I hope so, yeah.
Great. And as a result of writing this paper, and all the citations, what has happened thereafter to the data and the information that you've provided along with Tommy? Yeah,
so what we're seeing, the paper and to some extent what I spoke about in 2019 with Women's Place UK and Fair Play for Women was how the data that's around has been used to inform policy, because it always seemed to me that sports policy can be led by science. We understand that sports has a social role, but it also has a lot of numbers associated with it, a lot of, academic research. And so I was tracking really how the science mapped to policy development. And at that time when I spoke then, and in fact, when we published the paper, there was still this assumption that testosterone suppression would generate fairness. And so really, we were the ones that said, no, hang on a minute, here's this data set. We're not telling you what to do. And we were quite clear in the review that we weren't telling sports federations what to do. What we were saying was, here's this data set, you need to pay attention to it. And so they have done, as far as I can tell. We are seeing now, it's a bit slow, and the IOC we might want to park because they've gone their own way here. But we're now seeing increasingly that sports federations are realizing that they can't just assume that what boiled the egg in the first place, which is testosterone. They can't just assume that if you turn off the gas under the hob, that egg unboils. And I'm not clear why they hadn't questioned that before anyway. But maybe that's because I'm a developmental biologist and it was obvious to me that was the question.
Yeah, they weren't looking at it through your eyes.
No, exactly. Yeah, I think it's been quite a novel kind of angle to say to them, you can't just ignore this. And they're not, I think. I think we're going to see over the next couple of years, particularly with some of the sports policies that are coming out now, we are going to start to see some revisions, and we're already seeing some revisions. So
you mentioned in passing, talking about your collaboration with Tommy Lundberg, the World Rugby seminar, and that was a real eye-opener when we heard about that. Do you want to tell us a bit more about who was there, for instance, and what sort of evidence was given?
Yes, so this was set up, and I say it was set up like a courtroom. So it was very evidence-led, and there were several domains that were under examination. So there was a scientific domain, there was a medical domain, a legal domain, and a kind of sports ethic domain. And so it was organised so that there were people from both sides. So I was there, Tommy was there. And then on the opposing side, if you like, Jana Harper was there. And so within the science session, we took turns. And then we, between us, fielded questions from what you might think of as a kind of, a judicial panel, if you like, that was composed of rugby medics and rugby academics and that kind of thing. And then the same for the legal. There were people arguing that, you need to think about human rights law on gender identity, and people arguing about, you need to think about the law on personal injury and that kind of stuff. So it's really interesting for me. It was the first time I'd been involved in a policy process in sports to see how that worked out. And it was only because obviously I knew that this hadn't happened elsewhere. And it's really to be commended that World Rugby took it on so transparently and really tried to balance, you know, here's so fair play for women were there, but so were gendered intelligence. And let's hear you one after the other without fighting, you know, let's talk about what are your arguments for this position. And it was really, really great.
That's normally how arguments the discussions are done, isn't it? Looking at the evidence, looking at the arguments and which ones are more compelling.
No, absolutely. And
how refreshing.
Yeah. And I think when World Rugby made their decision, and you know, you'll have seen, you know, people who were part of that policy making decision. I wasn't anything to do with it beyond my presentation, but you'll have seen them talk about how they weighed it up and how they felt it was very obvious what decision had to be made. Now, rugby have a bigger safety issue than, for example, FINA do with swimming, although water polo is a contact sport. So they had this kind of very strong safety issue. They felt that was the only, as far as I understand, they felt that was the only decision that they could make. And I think they were slightly surprised when other groups didn't follow, you know, when they'd gone through by far the most transparent and thorough process, and that other sports federations didn't say, oh, hang on, they're doing something really different. They've excluded transgender women from elite competition. What, you know, do we have to do this? And there seemed to have been a bit of a lag.
Yeah, and what about the national governing bodies for like English and Scottish and Welsh and Irish rugby, or French, you know, the national bodies? How many of those followed World Rugby?
So I think in rugby, there are a Big Ten, and a couple of those, I believe Italy and Argentina, followed World Rugby's guidance. But there was a very quick, I think, rejection of World Rugby's guidelines. Now, World Rugby only has jurisdiction over international games, so I don't think they can impose their guidelines at the domestic level. But I think they thought, you know, hang on, what more can we do here to show you how important safety is for females and, you know, what's going on. So as far as I know, the home nations, France, are undergoing review. Certainly the home nations are. I believe Australia almost immediately said, no, that's not happening. USA said, no, we're not doing that. So, you know, we'll see how that proceeds. But I think that there are ongoing consultations within certainly the RFU, I understand.
Yeah, but you mentioned in passing insurance people being there as well as legal insurance. So I would imagine insurance costs would be a massive issue for rugby.
Well, look, I mean, insurance costs are massive for rugby anyway. So I think when you calculate various kind of additional risks, that maybe that's a drop in the ocean for whatever you're already paying. But I think it is quite stark to hear, you know, to be exposed to lawyers who have argued rugby cases where there has been, you know, not life-changing, but also catastrophic life-ending injuries, to talk about how much of an increased risk it is to have a male on the pitch. And you know, listening to the rugby academics, you know, there's an entire field of sports science dedicated to rugby, dedicated to concussion and various kind of leg injuries and that kind of thing, talking about if you smash two people together like they're billiard balls, what happens to someone's neck. And it's just it's quite horrifying to kind of hear as this closeted away person who's never thrown a rugby ball, I don't think. But yeah, there were lots of arguments, because of course personal injury, you know, who sues who? If a referee allows someone that they're not quite sure about onto the pitch, and then there is an injury, who's liable? How is this filtering down, and who has to make these decisions? And I don't think that had really been thought of with other sports federations. It was just kind of, oh, it'll be all right, you know, we don't have to worry about that, it'll work itself out. And rugby really can't afford to do that. They are dealing with potentially catastrophic injuries, and they need to be a little bit more diligent than perhaps, you know, World Athletics. Now, I'm not arguing that World Athletics don't have, you know, the right way to go, I think, but
so really, presumably a ref in a national match or a community match could be put on the spot and have no recourse, no safety net to decide whether to allow these teams to play.
Yeah, and I think that's really where I've found it most difficult to understand. Okay, so we know that professional elite level matches, they're probably fairly well set up to work by the regulations. They've got multiple kind of, you know, co-referees and that kind of thing to work with them on what happens. They know process. During this whole period, I live in quite a small market town outside Manchester. Manchester's a very strong kind of rugby area, and she coaches the local girls rugby team and talked to me about, first of all, there's nothing I can do if I get on a pitch with a trans woman, because if I complain, I may be fined, I'll be sanctioned. But also, what am I supposed to do as a coach to assess a trans woman? You know, I'm being told that case by case, just see if she said, that doesn't mean anything. I am not trained. What am I supposed to do? Take them to the gym and say, like, show me how many push-ups you can do. And so the lack of understanding that a lot of these policies, when people say, oh, this is only operable on elite levels, it really is. And there's no reason to forget that community level sports is really important for female athletes. It's where they start. It's often a little bit more dangerous, or the performance gap is wider at community level. And these girls don't just need, women don't need just protection in elite competition. They need their opportunities preserved. And that starts at the age of 6, 7, 10, you know.
Yeah, well, you know, I can see that. And why is it that the national bodies can't? I know you don't know the answer because you're obviously searching for the answer, but you know, it's really, and I'm guessing that the coaches and the referees daren't ask the questions because they daren't risk being labelled as somehow phobic, even though it's a safety issue, and safety should be at the heart of the game.
I've talked to 3 elite level rugby union women, who one of whom has been directly sanctioned for even asking a question. She was fined for just asking a question. And one of whom was reported to her now employer, she's a retired player, was reported to her employer just for asking a question, just to say, look, I'm not saying either way, but we need to be able to have this debate. I'm not sure it's fair, but I'm happy to, you know, talk about this. And so the penalties are large for women and for female athletes who talk about this. And it's quite difficult then, you know, because I always preserve their anonymity, of course. It's quite difficult to convince them or to offer support and say, look, there are lots of you, right? Because they don't see that. There's increasing, but there's still low visibility really for female athletes who speak out. Apart from in athletics, they've been particularly kind of well organised. And of course, we saw in cycling that the female athletes in British cycling had quite a strong say in what was going on in their sports.
Indeed. Yeah. Now, your pin tweet, which involves your paper with Tommy Lundberg in Sports Medicine, also invokes Joanna Harper et al., another paper. And this paper is, how does hormone transition in transgender women change body composition, muscle strength, and hemoglobin? So you know, it's interesting to see that you don't only quote your own, but you want to put Joanna Harper's there as well. Do you want to tell us why?
Well, because on a personal level, I kind of get on well with Joanna. That's fine. I mean, you know, it's been kind of perfectly cordial, if not friendly. I think Joanna is led by science and has historically believed that there could be scientific questions that address the issue. And Harper has tried to ask them. I don't always think the execution has been brilliant. The 2015 paper, you know, what's the performance time changes in transgender women who are national kind of sub-elite runners, but very, very good runners. It was the right question. It was a bad study. But I think Harper has always tried to carry that scientific thread through. And I think it's worth recognizing that. I suspect that the conclusions about skeleton, that transgender women, their skeleton doesn't change. There's no biologically rational mechanism by which it could. And that their muscle mass doesn't change that much. I think it became impossible for Harper to ignore that. And I think that should be recognized, that there's now two groups, if you like, who have always been pitted against each other in the media, in consultation processes, who actually say, no, actually, this is the data, right? This is where the scientific data is. Where we differ is how that data should be used in policy making. So I think it's important to recognise that.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I think it's valid as well, insofar as the research is being done, and seemingly without fear or favour, to see what the results are quite fairly, and it's such a change.
Can anyone else hear me? Is that me or Alison? You can hear me.
We can hear you. Alison's frozen.
Okay.
Yeah, I can.
While we're waiting for Alison to come back, could I ask you a question, Emma?
Yes, of course, yeah.
When we were talking about the elite sports seem to now be coming on board that there is that difference, that dichotomy between male and female. And it's something that really needs to filter down to the younger engaging in sports. There's always been those individuals that are dimorphic, but there seems to be this overpreponderance at the moment with regards to trans and the female voice being drowned out. How do we bring that back to some form of normality? Because science seems to be something that's not taken on board at the moment. I mean, the protected characteristics are protected characteristics for both sex and gender, but the sex and gender are being merged. And if you say anything as a woman, it's interesting to hear that the elite women are having the same challenge. But if you say anything as a woman, you're suddenly transphobic. And that's not actually the case. Have you had any sort of influence at, and I apologize because I don't know this, at the sort of governing level in making individuals appreciate that there is this difference? And it's not just in sport, it's got a wider problem.
Yeah, so at least part of what I do in sports is try to talk to younger girls, try to listen to what they need and what they're understanding. And it's very clear that what they need is leadership, right? What they need is some of these elite women who are not yet retired and who are therefore willing to forego a sponsorship deal. Now, I'm obviously not advocating that's what should happen, but to see a really strong figurehead, a current Olympian, that kind of thing. Now, we know that Sharon Davis and Mari Yamagauchi are fabulous, right? But imagine, you know, when Kate Archibald wrote for British Cycling to argue for fairness, and it was a very careful statement. But that's the kind of leadership that I think young girls need, because it will empower them. Because there are a lot of young girls who I have spoken to who are really conflicted, right? They're really conflicted about how they understand, you know, in a different generation, if you like, how they're understanding things like sex and gender, and what that means for sport. But a lot of them are quite clear that sport is somehow exceptional. You know, I don't necessarily agree with that, but trying to get them to talk means that we need, you know, we need leaders for these young girls. So trying to influence that at a policy level is difficult. Hopefully Sex Matters as a group is, you know, becoming a bit of a juggernaut in demanding that sex does matter. And it's not just in sport, that it matters, you know, across various aspects of our life. So that's where I'm at with that.
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you, Morag. And your answer was really good as well. We'll come back to some of the aspects of that later on. Your Fair Game paper, you were going to tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so that's quite an extensive, we've called it a policy document. It was contracted by a Canadian think tank who had, as far as I understand from their, you know, their kind of description and their biographies, if you like, had limited themselves an awful lot to economic policy, and had decided that they were sufficiently kind of powerful a voice that they could have something to say about politics. And we know, not that economics isn't politics, but you know what I mean, social issues, I guess. And they, you know, Canada has been incredibly captured by an awful lot, not just in sport, but an awful lot of, you know, I think self-ID is the norm in Canada, right? And that means an awful lot for women, not just in sport, but in rape crisis centres and those kinds of spaces. And so they wanted to try and, you know, put a bit of a break on the Canadian juggernaut, who have shown no signs of stopping, to be honest. And they have a couple of really influential policy groups in Canada, one of whom put out this absolutely, I mean, I have to describe it as nonsensical report about sports participation for transgender athletes, where they made some astonishing claims like nobody knows what causes a female brain to manifest a male body or something. It's just completely unscientific rubbish, basically. And so this think tank wanted to try and address some of this in slightly more scientific, you know, language. And so I got together with John Pike, who again I'd met at the World Rugby Conference, and a Canadian philosopher called Leslie Howe. She works a lot on rights issues, human rights, that kind of thing. And we were just asked to put together a kind of rebuttal, but trying to bring together, again, a synthesis of different disciplines, developmental biology, philosophy, and try to talk about what does that mean for sports policy.
I see. And have there been any ripples, any results from that?
So I
know you can't get Canada straight away.
No, and it's going to take a lot, but I think it's important to have that out there. It's important to not allow a group like the Canadian Centre for Ethics in Sports to just get to make statements that are unchallenged, okay? Yeah. And so even just having it there and having it referenced, and it really was just pulling together what I'd done with Tommy, what John had been writing about in terms of how categories are formed and that kind of thing. It really was just getting it out there saying, look, what they're writing, it's a direction, but it's not really the kind of, it doesn't stand up to much scrutiny.
Yes, I see. There's a question here. I'm going to take it before we're actually finished. But Lucy is saying, have you noticed if there's been any conversations taking place around child well-being and protection in sport and the impact on areas such as safety and care?
Yes, I have, and I've been party to some discussions, which I will keep anonymous here, but there are lots of sporting federations who are not just concerned with fairness down the track or that kind of thing. They are concerned with safeguarding. They are worried about what does it mean if we make exceptions for children who have taken puberty blockers, those kinds of things. So I think there is increasing awareness, and that's thanks to all of these fabulous feminist groups and voices who have said, you know, I've always kind of not been one track, but my you know, what's the word? my character is the sporting one, right? But there are groups like, you know, Transgender Trend and Fair Play for Women who just fabulous, who are saying, look, it's not just, you know, whether they win, it's about how they access changing rooms. And what does that mean? You know, if you say, look, if you transition before you're 12 or whatever Fina said, does that mean that we're incentivizing transition? And that's really serious, obviously, for a pre or shortly into puberty child to start taking these medications that really have very serious long-term health consequences. And so I think there is an increasing awareness, and that's thanks to the organizations that have all come together to take on the things that they're really good at and start saying, let's talk about this, you know, producing the resources compared to what we saw. And I don't know if you'll remember, to compare to what we were seeing 5 years ago, the amount of resources that are available that are referenced, scientific, they're sociologically good. It's just astonishing how much we've gathered in quite a short time.
Yeah, and I think Lucy's saying it's really important, considering it's around trips away, hands-on instruction, etc. Yeah, just a last little point on the Fair Game paper, that you wrote this with John Pike, and I think John was a philosopher from the OU who was working on the World Rugby seminar as well, wasn't he?
Yes, so John has worked for quite a long time on sports ethics, particularly around doping and understanding what makes something fair. Okay, what makes it, if you think about, and these are still ongoing questions, if you think about someone who has a low testosterone naturally, and you let them supplement that testosterone, we would obviously be talking typically about a male here, because it's important for males to have a, you know, functional level of testosterone just in general life. That what does that mean for sports, and how do we understand doping, therapeutic use, that kind of thing?
Yeah. Now, I know that you've recently been to America to take part in the ICONS conference, which was organised by Swim Mom. Those of you who've been following the Thomas UPenn debacle will know about Swim Mom's testimony on behalf of her daughter. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that conference and how that went on? It sounds great.
Yeah, well, so first of all, it was really good fun. And I got to meet some women that I've been working with online for a little while. And this is one of the massive benefits of the pandemic, has been the ability to connect internationally, right, with people that you wouldn't normally be able to meet with easily. So Swim Mum, she had seen this, you know, massive injustice with Thomas competing against her daughter, had heard her daughter's testimony about having to share a changing room with Thomas, who was visibly aroused. And, you know, listening to her talking about her daughter's stress and anxiety about how many towels to take into the changing room to cover herself up, right? And so I think it's fair to say, I'm not going to name her, I'm not sure how public she is yet, but she was furious, right? And so what she did was over about, I think the conference happened, I don't want to misquote, but something like 56 days after she first spoke,
Whoa.
And she'd suddenly just leapt into action and contacted anyone that she could come with. You know, it's Ivy League, so there are a lot of kind of connecting networks here, and they've just got together these huge kind of fairly diverse groups of people, including, for example, Nancy Hogshead-Makar, who is the Olympic swimmer who drives, you know, the Women's Sports Policy Working Group in the US with Martina Navratilova.
Yeah.
And Donna Di Verona was there, and just managed to get all these women and men to come together and say, you know, there's something gone wrong here, this needs to stop. And to some extent, the timing was necessary, because in Las Vegas, which is where the conference was, there's, I don't know if it's annual, but there's some regular meeting of the athletics directors in various US colleges or high schools. I don't remember which one. So they were all going to be in Las Vegas. So she had picked this as the time it had to happen. And they had a booth at this athletics director conference, and they were talking to people and engaging. And it was really fascinating to hear. So this is the NC2A, so it will be college level. It was really fascinating to hear them coming back and talking about what had happened with them today, and the amount of, we've all seen it. Any woman who's been on the street campaigning for an issue, you get lots of people saying nope, and then they tip you a wink and say keep going, and they're on your side, and you want them to be able to speak, but at least there's some small comfort that there are people who maybe can't be public but who are working from the inside. So that was really, so I think the timing was kind of determined by that. They really wanted to hit them quite hard with a load of people saying, this is what's going on.
Yeah. So you had a conference, and it wasn't just you, clearly.
No, so I presented a sciencey kind of session with Ross Tucker, who is the World Rugby scientific consultant, and with Carol Hooven, who is an evolutionary biologist from Harvard. She's written a book about testosterone and its effects, you know, not just on humans, but, you know, it's basically a hormone that drives an awful lot of biology in the world. And so we dealt with a scientific look. We dealt with some of the arguments that we are now seeing from policy groups, because it's quite clear that when we talk to you know, people who are making the decisions, the science is pretty much decided. Okay, if you are a sex affected sport, that's one where your, you know, physical structure makes a difference. If you're a sex affected sport, they know that you cannot undo male development with testosterone suppression. I'm not clear you can stop it sufficiently with puberty blocking, and again, there's, you know, strong ethical issues with puberty blockers anyway. So the question is, they know this, so they come back with all these kind of spurious arguments. So we spent some time in our session certainly talking about, how do you deal with these arguments? What's your response to when someone says, oh, but Michael Phelps, or, you know, and Megan Rapinoe coming out saying that your girls' volleyball team just isn't that important, which is just an astonishing thing for a female athlete to say. You know, your girls' volleyball team isn't important, but it's so important that unless this person gets on that volleyball team, they're going to kill themselves. It's, you know, these kinds of arguments that are just emotional, they're not well thought through. So we did that, but there were lots of athlete vignettes. There were some really inspiring talks from people like Chelsea Mitchell, who is one of the high school students, no longer at high school, she's at college now, who was probably the first we'd heard from the States, one of the high school trio who had been beaten by Andrea Yearwood and Terry Miller. So they were two. Sorry.
In Connecticut?
Yes, exactly. So talking about how she'd felt and how it was just so, you know, depressing to see this happening, and that there was nobody really who was willing to take up their cause. I spoke with Taylor Silverman, who is the skateboarder, I mean, I think skateboarders are pretty cool anyway, right? But you've got like 45-year-old me talking to this really cute, cool, hipster, trendy kind of 25-year-old saying to her, so tell me, what's the performance difference? How hard do you kick down? So it's really interesting and really good. And I think importantly in the US, you know, we're turf island, right? In the US, having that grassroots network of women and men who are prepared to come together on the sports issue, I think has been a bit missing in the US. So hopefully it's the seed that will continue to grow.
So you've kindled something there. Excellent. Good news. And a really good time was had by all as well.
Yes, it was.
And since World Rugby, there have been various developments in international and community sport affecting women's participation. It looks as though the IOC remains captured, and I don't know whether you want to speculate on why. Mix Thomas swimming for UPenn, and the recent decision by the governing body FINA, UCI and Mixed Bridges, and British Triathlon's innovative decision only last week. Good week for good news, wasn't it? So can you tell me some more? Can you fill in the gaps, please, on how these decisions may have come about?
Well, I mean, it's quite clear that FINA and UCI have kind of an international parallel, right? So we had Thomas in swimming and we have Bridges in track cycling in the UK. So I think it was quite clear that FINA and UCI, so they regulate swimming and cycling respectively. These are two major sports, okay? Between them and World Athletics, they are the majority of Olympic sports. And so I think it was felt that between those two and World Athletics, that they would really be driving policy in the absence of the IOC actually giving any policy guidance and just saying, you know, oh, it's a rights issue. Okay, you know, you take that, but you can take that route if you want, but you're the IOC and you're supposed to be giving the, you know, clear guidance to sports federations. So FINA had to act, right? Thomas on the world stage was just too much, I think, for anyone to ignore. And perhaps to a slightly smaller extent, just because cycling in the UK isn't quite as big as swimming is in the US. But Bridge is the same. These kind of headline, and they're both junior athletes, but these kind of headline stories that I think really just made everyone, in a way that I thought Laurel Hubbard might do, for example, at the Olympics, really made the world sit up and say, no, hang on, this is no longer just, however people might explain it, one random event that let a 43-year-old male weightlifter into a female weightlifting competition at the Olympics. This is happening to our, you know, young athletes. This is happening at college level. This is happening to junior teams, and it's affecting, it's too much now. It's not just someone we can forget about, which maybe was what people thought 20 years ago with Renee Richards, for example. Just park it, it's not going to happen again. So I think the headline nature of what's happening, and you know, it was just a really interesting time. So I think they just thought we have to do something, and FINA did, UCI did something slightly different. I've tried to talk to UCI about it. They're not that receptive to my arguments. I was told that my arguments were a subjective opinion and not grounded in science, which is just remarkable given I'm the primary author on a document that was cited in their policy. But FINA, I think, in a way that maybe World Rugby weren't able to achieve because they were so focused on safety, FINA have been able to give really clear guidance. I don't think it's perfect, and I think it's not the guidance I would have written. And again, I didn't have any hand in writing this, but they have been really clear, and they've been clear not just for you know, males who are suppressing T or have been through puberty. They've been quite clear about males with DSDs who may be legally recognised as female, but who in fact benefit from the advantages of male development. So that would be, you know, the XY DSD category. And so it's a really coherent policy. Like I say, it's not perfect, but how they've dealt with, you know, essentially if you have male advantage at any point from puberty onwards, then you cannot compete with females, end of story. And again, they were really transparent, right? FINA had a science board, they had a legal board, and they had advocates and that kind of thing. And they did this live on YouTube, right?
Really?
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously the consultation had been going on longer, but what they did on YouTube was have little mini presentations from all their representatives of the different boards, and then they put it out to a live vote, and it was overwhelmingly in favour of their proposed policy, which was the exclusion of males from the female category.
That looks like a really good model then, to have the process absolutely transparent to everybody.
Sure, and the parallel between World Rugby and FINA, who I think have been really, really diligent and importantly transparent, and who have reached the same decision, is really in contrast to those who are still trying to operate in the background, still trying to perhaps get away with something, still thinking, look, we don't have to deal with this. We don't know if we've got a trans woman who wants to compete, so we'll just kind of ignore it. So it's really remarkable that when you do get all of these domains together and you have a really extensive consultation process, my understanding it costs FINA £1 million to run that. But what you end up with is real clarity about, what means what and how this is going to work.
But this was only for international, was it? Or was it for everything?
No, my understanding is that FINA has said that national federations should follow.
Excellent. Well, that's really clear. But there was a little get out clause, and I think this is something that needs to be dealt with, about boys who might not have transitioned or might have transitioned below the age of 12. Is that one of the things you're not happy about?
Yes, it is. So I don't agree that, okay, let me start again. So FINA have essentially put the cutoff at male puberty. If you have, according to their policy, if you have not experienced any aspect of male puberty, you can qualify for the female category. Now, I've spent, because I'm always asked this, what about the differences pre-puberty? And Tommy and I touched on it a bit in our review. There are differences pre-puberty. We know that male children can jump a bit further. They can certainly throw further. And that's evident from like 3 to 5 years old, that they can throw further than girls. So I've spent some time over the last year, 18 months, trying to fill that gap. And I'm going to say from 0 to 11, but actually there are structural differences in males evident in utero. So from 15 weeks gestation, males are already longer, from head to, what do they call it, crown to rump or whatever. Males are already longer than female fetuses. And we know at birth that males are slightly bigger, they've got wider backbones, that kind of thing. They've got bigger heads. I always laugh at that. So it's clear that there are biological differences pre-puberty, and we know that there are performance differences pre-puberty. So male advantage is already, I think, set in utero. And testosterone surges don't only happen at puberty. There's a little phase just after birth, up to about 6 months, where male babies, male newborns, experience a surge of testosterone that's pretty comparable to the levels they get during classical puberty. It's called mini puberty. It's connected to BMI, it's connected to growth trajectories. And these are things that it's far too late. It's far too late when parking the kind of ethical issues aside, but even thinking about puberty blockers, it's too late. You're in a male body, and it's very clear that being male versus female has differences from conception, right? And so I think it's a compromise. I think it's an accommodation. And I think where we are at with policy, where lots of sports federations don't even recognise classic male puberty, then it's going to be quite difficult to get them to come back even a little bit further in. But I think the rationale is the same. When does male difference set in? It's very clear it's very early on in development.
Yes. And then last week with triathlon, I think that was just Britain though, wasn't it? Do you want to, I mean, the difference is small but significant, isn't it, between FINA and triathlon?
Yes, so they have completely prevented males in female categories in any competitive event. That's my understanding, that's my read. And that was done in consultation with their members and in consultation with various experts. Again, they haven't published the precise details, I don't think. But they said that, was it over 80% of their members felt that it was unfair, and they were available to have the SCEG report was made available to them. That's the Sports Council Equality Group report, which said that you have to choose between fairness and inclusion. You can't have both. They had that, they had a response to that. And it's overwhelmingly obvious that when you ask your athletes, which very few sports federations have so far done, when you ask your athletes, they have quite clear ideas about what constitutes fairness for females.
Yeah, and that applies to the male athletes as well as the females.
I think so, yeah. I think I'm absolutely astonished that if you are a male athlete, you are not acutely aware that you are stronger than your female counterparts.
Yeah, and they're realists. They know they've been through the same long training that the women have gone through, and they know the cost. Mm-hmm. Yeah, great. Now I've got some questions for you, and we've got lots of questions, and you've probably seen them popping up in the chat. First of all, actually, one of our numbers said something about use of language, and I don't know whether Melissa, I'll press this for you. That it's really difficult to talk about concepts using language which isn't applicable to the correct sex, and that's part of the way that this whole trans activity has gone, is by using language that disguises what's going on. So how do you feel as a researcher and working in academia about the pressure to use opposite sex language for people who are differently made?
So it doesn't come up in my regular academic research. It's male and female, and that's simply descriptive. And anyone who follows me on social media will know that I push back hard against, incorrect use of those. It was quite tricky for me then to think about how, if I wanted to influence policy, no, that's not what I mean. How, if I wanted to be part of the dialogue, how, if I was going to generate this research, that there is a need to make sure that your research is seen and heard, and you have to therefore at some point concede language. And I know that's really difficult for some people to hear, and I do completely acknowledge that when I use phrases like transgender woman or trans women, that's simply because that's how I've been able to talk to people. Because if I had written a paper that said males, men, particularly, the paper wouldn't have been published. So we had to use the language that has been typically used, and it is a concession, but it is something that ultimately allows me to speak to people that are willing to hear me if I make this concession. But I do appreciate that it annoys a lot of people, but I have to use language that I think is working for everyone, and that allows a dialogue, because it's really important. We've waited so long to get a dialogue with sports federations that not immediately having them look at you. And don't get me wrong, it's hard. I'm already called transphobic and a TERF and that kind of thing, and you can see them thinking, oh, she's just evil. So trying not to just immediately provoke them to switch off is really important.
Yeah. There's a corollary to this in an environment like this, where we are sort of talking amongst ourselves. Why do you use female language for men when you're speaking in this environment? And so that's the sort of question that, when you're in a more or less all-female environment and we're talking Turkey, Is it just that you're so used to doing this, or is it that there's something to be gained?
So it's not important to me whether it's an all-female environment or not. It's important to me now that I am being recorded and that I simply don't know all of you that are here.
Yeah, I understand. I get that. And in fact, that was the same question I heard being put to Helen Joyce when she published Trans last year. People were saying, well, why are you using this language? And she said exactly the same thing. It would not have got published had she not used the language that was approaching some sort of middle point, if you like, so that people would be halfway prepared to listen to it. And I understand how frustrating it is, but I do get that you want the work to be published. Alison Wren had a question early on, one of the very first questions, and that was about open access journals. Alison Wren, do you want to unmute and ask the question directly? And then Alison Weir is going to ask a question after that. So Alison Wren.
Yes, Emma. I spoke to you at that Women's Space UK conference. I'm a retired biology teacher, first class biology degree, blah, 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 half a PhD in genetics. And I really want to be able to access proper biological science journals about this stuff. And I'm wondering if you can let me know which ones I can actually get to, because being retired, of course, you've got no access to the posh journals. I want proper scientific journals, because of course there are no scientific journals that, you know, nobody publishes something which proves the sex binary, because we've known it for thousands of years. And, you know, they're always asking for that. But I would like to be able to get to proper journals rather than kind of opinion pieces.
Sure. So certainly Tommy and my review was published open access. I have quite strong feelings about open access and the current subscription model in scientific publishing. So I think it's really important, but it is really tough, as you say. So Kathy Devine, who I work with at Sex Matters, she's an independent academic. And so paying open access fees is often out of the reach. You know, if you're writing as an independent scholar, it's coming out of your own pocket, and they're not, you know, there are many hundreds, if not more, pounds. I don't know how to say this while I'm being recorded. There are websites that if you Google for them, they will direct you to journal articles that are behind paywalls. So for example, there's a hub for scientific journals, and maybe someone will write it in the chat, where essentially they just rip articles that they don't think should be open access. And so actually it's often easier to use that than it is to navigate your way through journals.
I put my email in the chat, so if you think about it, just email me, please.
Yeah, because I can't really be seen to promote pirated kind of like scientific journals.
It's a big problem. Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Okay.
Other than that, I can access lots of stuff. So if there's anything you need, then
it's just trying to debunk these endless. I've just finished writing a critique of this thing that's called The Scientist, written by an anthropologist who totally conflates sex and gender, talks about different child rearing practices and clownfish, of course. We have to have the clownfish and the hermaphrodites and the serial hermaphrodites and all that. And I would really like to be able to look at, you know, because I understand scientific terminology. Yeah. So I could read if a proper bloody paper referenced and everything else. That's what I want.
So I've written the opening chapter to a book on sex and gender, and it is called Two Sexes. And that's going to be in an academic textbook, I think, coming towards the end of the year. Because you're right, it absolutely is time that someone just set out on paper, what's the evolution here, what's the developmental biology here, and what are the arguments that keep getting thrown back, and what's the purpose of those arguments? Why do, you know, sex has always been a really quite a boring thing.
Yeah.
In terms of, I mean, it just says what you do when you want to make a, you know, new individual. And obviously as a human society, we've layered kind of roles and that kind of stuff onto that. But it's really quite mundane, and there's absolutely no reason people should be losing their head about it to the point where they say ridiculous things like sex is a spectrum. So that will be forthcoming, and I'm sure there will be various iterations of that around, and it's extensively well referenced.
Yeah. Well, I think we're all going to be waiting on tenterhooks for that, and I hope to goodness that you're going to let us all know.
We'll buy it.
Yeah,
Even
we'll
if
all buy
it's
it.
£70.
I won't get any royalties, so I'm not going to argue one way or the other. But
thank you.
But we might try and put. I wrote that with Colin Wright. We might try and.
He's good. He's good.
Yeah. He was in Las Vegas at this women's conference. It was the first time I've met him. But we might try and publish it as a kind of academic article or letter or extended essay, something like that. Get it into a journal basically, and then then it's there.
Thank you.
Looking forward. Okay, now next question is from Alison Weir. Alison, are you ready to unmute?
Yeah, I can do. I don't know if it was so much a question, actually. I'm sitting sweltering in France as well, and hardly anything. What I was talking about was quite interesting, what Emma was saying about we focus on puberty, male puberty and testosterone and the impacts of that. And I'm fairly involved still with athletics and involved with Scottish athletics. And track and field world records, I'm also a bit of a stats geek, and track and field world records are actually held from age 5 onwards. And every single record, bar one, I think, which is something like the 60 metres for 5-year-olds, and I think the girls' record exceeds the boys by about 1/100th of a second. But every single record other than that is held by a boy. You can compare the boys and girls' records, and each year as they go on 6, 7, 8, 9, etc., the gap just increases and increases. I'm not sure what Emma feels, and if I want to make it a question, is it a case of potentially winning the war, if you like, on the impact of male puberty, and then going back to sort of look at, I get frustrated with this because sport is objectively categorized to recognize physical difference, whether that be heavyweights can't fight featherweights, or, you know, males shouldn't be competing with girls, and sometimes even within categories, I mean, within female you have weight categories and things. It's an objective categorization, recognizing physical advantage. But where girls start in sport is when they're little. Girls start, I was doing gymnastics and swimming and things when I was 5. I was doing athletics when I was slightly older than that. But if you're going to have boys competing with girls up until that age, will it discourage girls? And when do you think is the right time, I suppose, to start looking at that issue?
So I absolutely agree. I don't think it's quite as obvious as you make out, but I think there is a general pattern. Certainly in throwing, it's evident that boys are way ahead of girls from very early on. Running and jumping, it's a little bit messy, and I've not tried to apply any statistical analyses to those age groups, but that is something I feel like I should do. I have 5, 10, 15. I haven't kind of applied it across the whole data set. But I think we know from school performance data, you know, fitness kind of programs, and we know that boys are bigger than girls, and that, you know, it's no surprise that there are performance differences. So I think there is an argument to be made that sex segregation, particularly if it's going to be a competitive route, you know, a way to develop that might turn out to be something the girl wants to pursue in a competitive sense, I think that's really important. But I think actually, for me, the stronger argument for separation before puberty is a social one, and it's how we know girls are brought up and how they are taught that sport is not for them, that they will get sweaty and red-faced and the boys won't like them, or, you know, their peers won't like them. And we know how girls perform when they're in groups. So I was speaking with a pre-puberty sports scientist who said that when they do, you know, do you remember like those beat tests that you had to do, like run back and, you know, back and forth shuttle runs and all those kinds of things? If one girl drops out, the other girl shortly follow. So girls are responding to each other in sport, and they're responding to boys around them in sport. And so I think it's really important for girls to have a protected space where they can really be themselves, okay? And we know that girls enter puberty earlier than boys. Girls are into puberty by the age of 9 or 10. Boys typically don't enter puberty until 11 or so. And so at 9, you've got a girl who maybe is experiencing body changes. Maybe some of her schoolmates are, but the boys aren't. And that's really something that I think girls need space to explore as well, and to be able to talk openly, and to be around girls that they're not, you know, embarrassed or shy to be around. So I think there are grounds in terms of biological performance, but I think there's a really strong social argument.
I know, yeah, you're right. It's changing. It's changing. It's having one of the impacts in talking about sport is girls' menstrual cycles and how that impacts and things, and they have to cope with things like that, as well as coping with just straight out performance issues, all sorts of things that impact. And you're right, girls drop out of sports far earlier than boys. They're reluctant to participate in the first place. If you're having mixed sport, it's difficult to get a place on the team, in team sports, rather than I mean, I've been involved in individual performance sports, but in team sports, if they're not going to get places, they're discouraged from continuing with the sport and competing and things. There are lots of reasons. Yeah, you're absolutely right that performance is not there are many different factors that impact youngsters in sport. And, you know, and partly these are the things we should have been talking about. Anorexia in girls, who, particularly distance runners and things like that, gymnasts. We should be talking about this. We shouldn't be talking about males competing in female sport, you know. But you're right. I absolutely agree. There are many reasons why we should be looking at this much earlier.
Thank you, Alison. The next question is going to come from Judith Bailey. I'm just going to refer to a question that Toby Keynes had about the triathlon decision. What he's asking is whether you know how they came to those decisions, and also whether your paper had any input and any bearing on it.
I spoke to the CEO of British Triathlon about 6 weeks ago.
Okay. Any comeback on that, Toby? Do you want to add anything?
No, not really. I mean, I don't know what the background was in terms of the scientific input, and it sounds as if Emma doesn't either, except that, well, to what extent was your conversation part of the process of developing that policy, or was it just an ordinary conversation? Were they consulting extensively? Is there a paper behind that decision that explains the rationale?
So I think they cite me and Tommy in their rationale, if I am recalling the correct document. And so so Andy Salmon, the CEO, he was talking with a lot of people. He was trying to get a handle on what was out there, what did the scientific data say. So he spoke to me, but I suspect he spoke to Jenna Harper as well. And just trying to understand, what did the science say? Now it's triathlon, right? It's cycling, it's swimming, and it's running. All of those are sex affected. And so I think he was quite led by, what's the science? What does it mean? And what does that mean for fairness? So really this interpretation, and also what can we do in law, which is where a group like, I think Sex Matters is really important, because certainly the legal arm of the group have got a really clear understanding of the interpretation of the Equality Act. And so I had a chat with him as I was wandering around my back garden. But I didn't have any kind of formal role in, you know, writing anything to do with their policy. I think they just like to chat with me, see which way the land lays. And I'm pretty honest. I'm good at saying, oh, but you know, that's a bit less secure than this, or you know. So, but yeah, it was a nice chat.
Actually, we've got a comment from Joanne Finkel, who is a triathlete. So, Joanne, do you want to tell us your contribution there?
Hi. Yes, it's just as a triathlete, BTF actually, I think, conducted themselves particularly well. And I would suggest that they did a much better job than British Cycling did, of which I'm also, well, I was a member. I didn't renew my membership to British Cycling on the basis of their handling of the Emily Bridges cases. You know, she, he, they, Emily deserves to know where they can and cannot compete days before a race. But BTF put around a survey to all of their members. They asked us all a very comprehensive set of questions. They gave us all plenty of time to respond back. It seemed, in my experience of doing these things, to be a pretty unbiased questionnaire. The language was fair, it was clear, it was inclusive, it was, you know, it was great. I think and as a triathlete, I think they did a pretty sterling job.
Thank you. Thanks very much for that, Joanne. That was really helpful. Thanks for your comment. Now, Judith Bailey, are you ready to ask your question? It was about original research.
Yeah, I can do. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah. No, I was just thinking about going back to how we got to where we are. And as in so many other areas of policy, what people do is ask the trans person what should be done in terms of trans-related policy, and then they take what they're told. But in this case, when you've got that, it's established and it's established as fact, and you have to then fight against it and try to unprove all the things that you're told. And in the particular case of sport, I understand it was Joanna Harper, who is trans-identified athlete, who produced the first piece of work, which is the information and knowledge on the basis of which all of the inclusive policies were made, and which we're still having to fight against in terms of the assertions that are made. And I've heard Emma being very clear about exactly what Joanna's first piece of work, which was that influential, consisted of. And I know you said, Emma, that Joanna does recognise there are scientific issues here. And I've seen things you said recently which suggest you realise she's gone beyond that. But it's still very much looking for reasons to justify inclusion rather than fairness. But I just wondered if you'd like to run through for us exactly what that initial piece of work was that you've had to fight against since.
Yeah, so, and Harper has written a book called, I think it's called Sporting Gender, where they talk about quite extensively the meeting process in 2015 and about how that work was received. And it seems that the IOC were dealing with a small number of cases, and certainly back in 2004 they felt it would really be a minimal issue. They ran the numbers, and 1 in 12,000 males have gender dysphoria, and an even smaller subset of those will be sporty and that kind of thing. In 2015, Harper gave them a lifeline because they wanted to be kind. The IOC is something that promotes social justice as well as, fair sport. And so they wanted to be kind, and Harper gave them this, lifeline, which was, it probably is fair. And Harper had showed that by looking at 8 trans women runners who had competed within male competition and who had comparable distances recorded in the female competition. And Harper rationalized that if they were, let's say, the 50th percentile in the male field and were 50th percentile in the female field, then that meant that there was no gain in advantage. So the amount that they slowed down was just about the right amount to see them performing equivalently within each sex field. And so I call this ranking advantage. So if you don't gain a rank, the IOC thinks that meant fairness. In 2015, they thought it meant fairness. And so, yeah, there were 8 runners, and I've said it in this 2019 talk, they were just self-reporting times. And not all of them could be verified. So you've got someone who's running a 5K at the age of 19, and then transitioning and saying, here's my 5K time when I was 29, for example. And trying to understand what's happened in the interim. Was someone training? Were they injured? Were those 5K races on the same course? Was it raining one day and not the other? And even in the data, there are things like, oh, this one was uphill and this one was downhill. One of the data sets that Harper excluded from the analysis was a runner who got miles better within the female field, and that was put down to training. So this person was running a marathon in a given time in the male field. It was actually faster running that marathon in the female field, but that was like, oh no, that's training, and they got really serious. So that person was excluded from the calculations because Harper needed to show that there was no increase in rank. And so that's interesting. The IOC thought that was like a really good way to assess like male advantage. But now when we say to them, or we're, trying to get out there, well, look, you had Laurel Hubbard, who was a national level male weightlifter as a junior, and then who switched to the female category at the age of 43 and is suddenly an Olympian. That's a massive jump in rank, right? A huge jump. You've got Thomas, who went from something like 500 in the 100-yard freestyle to number 1. That's a massive jump in rank. And so what the IOC now don't want that argument. The very arguments they took from Harper in 2015 are now falling on deaf ears. And it's a shame, because we are seeing increasingly gender fluid world, all that kind of stuff. We are seeing lots and lots more cases where we can say, look at their ranking change. They've gone from national to international. They've gone from, like Thomas, 500 to first in the country. And it's really weird that the IOC are now saying, no, let's not think that that's a real way to assess the evidence. I don't think it's the best way to assess the evidence anyway. But once they'd established that they were prepared for those arguments, they should be prepared to listen to them again.
Okay, thank you. Melissa Cohen's got a question about research. Melissa, do you want to ask this one, please?
Sure. As we all are aware, there's a big crop of not just girls medicalizing, but boys, and they're being blocked and they're being put on hormones, and they're not going through natural puberty. I'm really curious about the morphology, the physical development of these kids. Like, there's a lot of rumors going around, oh, osteoporosis at a young age, crutches. I don't know. I don't believe all these rumors. I am looking to see if anybody's doing any actual research on the growth and development of these blocked children, both boys and girls. I think I was at some quote unquote pride events in Los Angeles this last month, and I think I saw some of these kids. And I just need more information to try to I don't want to make assumptions. That's not the right thing to do. So anyway, who is studying this, if anybody, and where can I find information?
Yes, so there are a couple of, I think 3 or 4 maybe research cohorts now of, I've paid particular attention obviously to the boys that are blocking puberty. To try, like you say, what happens? What do these boys look like when they're 20? What's changed about them? What's different to if you have a male who suppresses testosterone at 18? And so it's quite difficult to track, because obviously they're going through puberty anyway. They block and then they've got a slightly delayed, but perhaps not pathologically so. There's a bit of catch up that's necessary, but they're at a time basically when they're growing. And so it's really difficult to track, are they growing faster? Are they growing, along the right speed? But if you look at those data, if you look at 20-year-olds who have had puberty at least partially blocked, so they've blocked as boys, they're still stronger than females, right? And they still got more lean body mass. And really interestingly, I saw a paper about a month ago, and the very title is Trans Girls Grow Tall. And it's a cohort or a kind of retrospective collection of data from boys who have blocked puberty and who end up very close to male height at the age of 20, 25. And it's in I think it's in a Dutch population. The average height of a Dutch male is something like 183 centimeters, a Dutch female 170 centimeters. These trans girls, males who have blocked puberty, they end up around 185. If anything, they're slightly taller than average males. And so it seems to be there's something about the skeleton that you can't quite stop growing. Puberty blockers delay it, but once you add in at least one other hormone, whether it's estrogen or testosterone, these both cause bone growth. We know that happens normally in puberty anyway. So there's something about height that's genetic, and you can't undo that. And what happens with height is you get broader shoulders and skeletal levers and that kind of thing. So in terms of what I've looked in terms of sport, it's clear that not even puberty blockers will prevent male advantage from shining through.
I'm thinking not just in sport, but just in general, like all sorts of developmental issues. So I know you're mostly focused on sport, but I think I saw 3 of these boys. They were attending these events with only with their mothers. I call them their Transhausen mothers. And they were very, I was thinking about the castrati of Italy. They were tall. They didn't have a pot belly, which later they might get in life, but they had a curvature of their spine. And I don't want to make I'm trying to do some research. So and also the girls, like, we don't know, not that it's for sport, but what happens to somebody who doesn't go through their natural puberty?
Yeah, well, I mean, puberty is a really key time in terms of health for bone accrual. And you have this huge accrual of bone density during puberty, both in boys and girls. And obviously that's associated with growth spurts in both sexes. So there was this report, I think from the Tavistock in the UK, that said, it's all right. And I don't anyone take this verbatim, but something like it's all right because there's no loss in bone density in kids that are blocking puberty. And of course, that's not sufficient. You're not supposed to just stay level in terms of bone density. You're supposed to be kind of doubling it. And so this made it sound like, oh, it's okay. They're not losing bone density. That's a good thing. It's like, hang on, they are slowly getting further and further away from their peers in what is normal bone density at those ages. So there is definitely a slowing of growth and accrual of bone density when kids are put on puberty blockers. I don't think we know in the long term what that means for later risks of osteoporosis and that kind of thing. Now, we know in the US, there has been an attempt at a class action lawsuit for Lupron, I think, which is given to girls who undergo precocious puberty. And they are saying at the age of 25, their jaws are crumbling, their teeth are falling out, they're getting fractures and that kind of thing. It's quite clear that bone density is a really, really key space to study because your bones are so important just for your general health. I'm probably not preaching to anyone who doesn't know this, but it's so important that when you fall over, you have the kind of physical capacity to bounce back from that. And we really need to, and that's not even going into brain maturation and obviously fertility being compromised and sexual pleasure being compromised. But you're right, the castrati is really interesting to me because we all know that castrati grow tall. And so it's quite clear that you can lose testosterone very early, yet still get very tall.
Mm-hmm.
And
I feel like there's almost no information on the castrati, of course. I don't have any research specific, but so I'm looking for ways I can find some research. But yeah, talk more about the castrati.
No, just the I think it was known they were fairly, well, that may be social, they were fairly successful males, should we say, given the lack of
but those were the ones, they castrated a lot of, like, people would give their sons to be castrated hoping that they would become big singers. So it was like a really big problem with I guess in the church. And so only a few became really successful singers, but a lot of boys got castrated from what I understand.
And I have looked for any kind of collected data, but you're dealing with, anthropologists on single case studies and that kind of thing. But yes, very tall. And males with Klinefelters, that's low testosterone, they get very tall too.
Right, thank you. A question has just come up, can you tell if there's been any increase in Klinefelter?
Any what, sorry? Any increase in Klinefelter?
Has any research shown that Klinefelter syndrome is increased?
I've never seen that. I don't know what. I don't know why it would. I don't see why that would be.
Mark McFadden asked a question.
Yeah.
You just unmute and.
Yeah, I just wondered with regards to Klinefelters, was there any evidence that when it came to trans individuals, and particularly trans sport, that when you're looking at this, are you doing any genetics to see are they purely XY or are they XXY?
So my understanding is that gender clinics don't bother testing for karyotypes now. So karyotypes is your confirmation of sex chromosomes, because there's no higher incidence of sex chromosome issues than there are in the general population. I think it was a theory that these were people who had some kind of DSD, and some kind of changed hormone level. There is some evidence maybe that females who have high levels of testosterone because maybe they have an adrenal issue or they're exposed to an environmental source in utero, particularly if mum's got an adrenal issue. There is some evidence that they're slightly overrepresented in gender clinics, but nowhere near, the kind of 80% who are actually just lesbians.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next to last question from Sue England. Sue, can you ask your question about Humboldt, please? Not the penguin.
Oh, right.
Not the penguin.
Okay. Well, here in Germany, we have a huge scandal where one of these, in the summer, we have all these, the long night of something or other, music, science, whatever. And a young academic wanted to give a talk about the fact that, why do we know that there are two sexes, for example, a biologist. And after there were protests from apparently the law department, I'm ashamed of them, and also trans activists, the university said they stopped it because they had too many problems with the possible violence. Now, this is not being handled well at all. There's supposed to be some sort of meeting this week where this poor young woman has got to turn up with about 4 men from the university who are obviously sort of not on her side. But in Germany, this is a huge scandal over academic freedom, obviously. And Germany has a few issues, has a lot of history in particular, which people can directly refer to about turning down ideas, refusing to listen to people. So I wondered if this is knocking through, people are hearing about this in the British academic community, and whether you might have anything to say about it.
Yeah, so I've been away for a little while. I've only been back for 5 days or so. But I have been in contact with this woman and also with people who are trying to support her, because quite clearly I'm appalled by it, and I think everyone should be appalled by it. I think academia is a space not just for freedom of speech, but perhaps even pushing the boundaries of, what would be acceptable on the street, if you like. I think we are duty bound as academics to engage with subjects that you can find deeply unpleasant, but under the premise that you have to, you know, throw these things around before you can throw them out. And so I'm appalled. I don't know quite what I can do. I'm just kind of getting up to speed with getting people in touch with other people. So I hope that, I think, does she have a meeting this week, Sue? Do you happen to recall?
That's what they're saying. I will monitor it.
Is that in person? Do you know?
It's what?
Is it in person?
Yeah.
I don't really know how to make an impact there. What's the union movement like in Germany?
On this, I have no idea what the situation is. As I say, her university seems to be doubling down against her. And they're not confronting any of the issues. You know, the fact that this is something that's been shut down, they say, because they can't provide security.
Can you turn your video off? It might help the connection.
Me?
Okay, I think there's a problem there.
Okay, well, I'm trying to monitor it as well, but there is supposed to be a meeting sometime this week. But you know, the university is not being helpful at all, really, in that they're sort of just pushing it into sort of vague sort of corners, instead of directly confronting the fact that they themselves have accepted that threats of violence can shut down perfectly normal academic talk. But of course it was an academic talk because it was a long night of science where the public are invited to come along. You know, it was obviously something that was going to sort of touch the public, as opposed to, you know, being a sort of internal university seminar in that sense.
But we know that the general public aren't really under any illusions about the fact that there's two sexes. So, okay, I will have another little think and see whether I can get a couple of big names to maybe co-sign a letter. And
thank you.
Okay.
I think we've just got time for one more question. Lucy has got a question. I've lost the actual chat there because I've been in and out this evening. But Lucy's got a question about, I think, safeguarding. Do you want to fire away?
Hi. Thanks very much, Emma. This has been really interesting. I work in safeguarding in sports, so child wellbeing and protection in sports. So my thoughts always come back to that side of it. So it may not even be a question that you can answer, but I think when we're talking about participation, we overlook the concerns around child protection a lot of the time. And I know I asked earlier if you'd heard any conversations, and I mean, places like Transgender Trend and Sex Matters are fantastic at raising these points. But part of the SGEG report, there was concerns within that, within the summary report, where child wellbeing and protection officers were actually leaving their roles because they didn't know how to balance the policies between inclusion and child protection. And I just wondered if there had been any sort of space made for these conversations to happen within the sort of wider sporting community that you've been involved in. Has there been any conversations around? Because, I mean, sex impacted sports, it doesn't matter about testosterone level when you're talking about child protection and safe and care guidance and that kind of thing. It won't impact, but it will impact in the changing rooms and the trips away and who's coaching your children. It'll impact in all those areas. So testosterone isn't the main concern, I don't think, from the angle that I look at it from. So I just wondered if there had been any wider conversations around that side of it.
So my experience of that particular angle is it tends to come a bit later than people who peak hard over the sports fairness issue. And I just think because it's kind of the second thing that people think of, unless you're coming from an angle where you're particularly expert. So I have seen in kind of almost like real time, people who start from a position of it's not fair, but we can include, you know, these males everywhere else, to pretty quickly realizing that that's not, you know, plausible, it's not remotely desirable, and it shouldn't be happening. And as I said, I kind of alluded to earlier, I've had people that I've spoken to about fairness, and that being my only intention to kind of really make sure that they understand the science, who have independently brought up, but it's not just about this, Emma, it's about safeguarding,
Okay.
about changing routes. So I think there is increasing awareness. I don't know if there is kind of dedicated space or a particular movement, or whether it's kind of the intersection of, you know, those kinds of changing room, toilet spaces, bathroom spaces, that affect an awful lot of public life, not just sports. But if there's anything you think that would be helpful for me to consider there, you can email me. If you email Sex Matters and just say this is for Emma, then that will.
Oh, that would be great. I've got some things around section 22 of the Gender Recognition Act and the Gender Recognition Reform Bill that's going on in Scotland, and the impact in sport that's just really not been covered at all in any sort of context that I've seen. So it would be really helpful if I could send some information to you.
Yeah, a lot of policy, certainly in the UK, are really lenient on it. So, yeah. Okay, you know, we need some regulation in gameplay, but then it's up to the trans person in question where they choose to spend their overnight. And that's obviously not something that I think is acceptable.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Look, you tweeted something about FIFA recently. I think it was either yesterday or today. Supposing that they might allow self-ID of trans women into female football. Do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, so I'd seen a few weeks ago that FIFA were saying that they were considering self-ID following the Olympic model. And I think they may have said, oh no, we'll take a bit more time in response to the FINA decision, the swimming decision. And so I think that remains to be seen. But just from a general sports point of view, FIFA are the last federation that I would trust, I think. I mean, there are awful scandals across all sports. But FIFA just seemed to be a bit kind of rotten to the core. That may be not the case anymore, but I don't know. I think it will be interesting to see, having said we're considering self-ID, to then, you know, what would be an amazing backtrack or backpedal to say, oh no, actually we think FINA have got this right. But I think they're the fourth one that I think is on my list, because we've got FINA, UCI and World Athletics, where I think I've got some good predictions. I'm not going to reveal them here, but I don't think it takes too much to understand which direction they're going in. But FIFA would be a massive breakthrough. It's football, right? And half the world plays it. Volleyball is actually the biggest sports federation. I didn't know that until 6 months ago. But I think it would be really troubling to have such a massive sports federation opt for self-ID, and especially football, which is nominally non-contact, but really isn't a non-contact sport. It's a very physical, very heavy contact sport.
Okay, is that the answer you were looking for, Lucy? Nope. I think we had somebody asking earlier, but I've lost that particular question.
It was me again. I'm sorry, I was asking loads, but yeah, it's great. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Look, I think we've had a fabulous evening this evening. We've had lots of really great questions from the audience here, and absolutely tip-top information from you, Emma. It's been a really great evening. We shan't be having a session in August. It's holiday time, and our next session, which I think will be in September, will be at the Lib Dem conference. So our next normal monthly session will be on the second Monday in October. And so look out for the announcement, or sign up to our website, liberalvoiceforwomen.org, and we'll send you the invitation as soon as it comes out. We also want to hear from you with any policy related issues or problems that you want us to raise. Thanks to Anna and our technical staff and the organizer of our Eventbrite Zoom meetings. Thanks to all of you for being part of a great event. And most of all, thank you very much to our fantastic speaker, Dr. Emma Hilton, fond of Beatles, for talking to us about her feminism and work on sex differences. Thank you so much.